Replacing Brook Lopez for the Bucks harder than it seems? I think so. We'll get into that conversation and more surrounding the future of Giannis next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now is the time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Joined today by senior NBA analyst for the Action Sports Network and one of the hosts of the Locked On Nuggets podcast, Matt Moore. And Matt, I think we referenced it earlier in the week, but you got picked up a couple days ago talking about the summer ahead of the Bucks and some of the players on their roster, notably Brook Lopez, who has been very polarizing among Bucks fans, to put it mildly. But the intel that you have, Brook Lopez not likely to be back with the Bucks next offseason. I said going into the offseason, I think that's where most Bucks fans and all of us were as well, that it probably just doesn't fit anymore. But when you look at all the guys that the Bucks have this summer to make decisions on, if we take Bobby Portis and his player option out of it, is it a safe assumption to say Brook Lopez is going to command the most interest in money?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, Brook's a name that you can bring in and feel like you landed somebody who's going to make a major impact, right? I want to say that I've heard a lot of, like, I'm always a little cautious about and nervous and, well, just vomity, just very nauseated about reporting on who the Bucks, because they've put out a lot of noise about trading guys before. Like, Mid was on the block for like 18 months prior. And I'd heard that like Brook was probably not going to return the last time that he assigned the deal, that they were going to work out a deal for him to go elsewhere. And then they just kept him, and that they may get to the end of it. Part of this, I think, is at this point in the offseason, teams are planning on how they want to build the team. But then you get to July, or you get to that, realistically, you get to that last week in June, when they're not supposed to be talking to each other. And then you realize, like, oh, we weren't able to get this. We weren't able to do this. We weren't able to do this. Hey, we really kind of got to bring him back based off of this. So when I say probably unlikely to return, like, that's kind of been the assumption that I think most people have made. That, there's been a lot of talk of various suitors. The Lakers, I am always a little suspicious of, just because I think Brook was so unhappy with his first stint there. I just don't think it fits what he wants for his daily life, regardless of how awesome it is to go to Avengers World and Disney. But like, in general, I do think, I think it's probably likely, especially given I'm trying to piece together some of the bigger things I've heard, which is, same thing everybody else has heard, which is, hey, Giannis is probably staying put. And then the other thing is they probably want to shave some money off the luxury tax and or escape it entirely. And it's just like very hard to see a financial plan where they're able to do that and keep Brook, given what he's likely to demand on the market.
Yeah, and I mean, I think everybody kind of envisioned life after Brook Lopez last year in the playoffs, and most Bucks fans were pushing for it when you saw the way they played against the Pacers and the way that they found this is the group that works, this fit here. But my big hesitation is, I've talked about it on the show before, you see a lot of criticism for Brook Lopez, and I'm not going to say Brook Lopez is the athlete he once was or as nimble and a guy that can get up and down the floor, but he still brings a lot of value, as we just mentioned, with the interest he's theoretically going to have on the open market. So how do you replace that? Because as good as Giannis at the 5 is in the playoffs, we know that's not how Giannis wants to play throughout the season. So you still need somebody else to eat up those innings, if you will, during the regular season. It's not a really great market for bigs out there. That Brook is one of the best that is out there. And everybody talking about, well, Jericho Sims, retain him. There's a lot to like there, but I don't think Jericho Sims is a starting center in the league. And you certainly have challenges playing him alongside Giannis.
Yeah, and if that's where you get to, right, where it's like, well, we couldn't keep Brook and couldn't find anybody, so I guess it's gonna be Jericho. Like, that's This is one of the reasons why everybody's a little bit still kind of like, really? Like he's not like Giannis isn't going anywhere?
Yeah.
Like really? And that's why there's that skepticism. But I think that most of that obviously just comes down to how Giannis feels about it. And I'm like, I want Giannis to stay. I just think it's a better story for him and the league and everybody. I think everybody wins if Giannis stays. But also it's like, hey, if we just like jump to the end here, you're going to need this year to completely it's going to be a long-term process. It may be one of those things where they have to pick up somebody off of somebody out of the G League, take a risk on a guy. It may have to be a thing where they trade an asset into the draft in order to get somebody late in the round to try and take those kind of opportunities. You might have to go, grab a bunch of guys that are off the street and just be like, can any of these guys work out for us in terms of being unexpected? Or maybe you're able to luck into something where Toronto's, looking at everything, but one of the things that they're exploring are major trades for stars. And if they go that route, hey, maybe you're able to go get Jakob Poeltl, Kelly Olynyk, somebody that's able to work out some sort of deal to fill in the gap. But all of this feels like they're not going to have like the starting center replaced and solid, I don't think, by the end of the summer. If they do, it's masterful work, I think, by John Horst.
I mean, it sounds like you're leaving the door open for a potential DeMarcus Cousins reunion in light of everything we've seen the last. Yeah. I mean, and you can, and I'm sure people will push back too with, well, if Bobby Portis opts in or you work out an extension with Bobby Portis and Giannis are your starters in the front court, but you're still back at that spot of, okay, who is playing behind them then? And that's where the Bucks ran into, as good as the fit was, quote unquote, and how much they could play younger and more athletic and get up and down the floor. When they got to that spot in the regular season when Bobby was suspended and Jericho Sims was injured and you just had Giannis and Brook Lopez, that's where you saw everything fall off a cliff in terms of their defense and their rebounding. So it's still a massive lift to try to find even the bench production.
Yeah, and I do think I have at least people in the league believe that they're going to keep Sims and he's going to be a guy. I think they really do think that he's got upside. Yeah. And that if that's a gamble that you're willing to take, you just got to be willing to pivot. That to me is like covering the Nuggets. I see so many similarities with Milwaukee and Denver and how they built teams under the previous CBA and now are here and are like, wait, what? Yeah. But one of the things I think that both teams have to do when they're in this spot, when they're top heavy, you have to have options. Like we yelled about this all year on Locked On Nuggets. It's just like, look, man, bring in 3 different centers so that it's like, all right, this one didn't work. The Dario Saric didn't work out. Okay, have this option. And the Nuggets will say, like, we had like Dario Saric and Duron Holmes. Then Duron Holmes told his Achilles and Dario Saric got sent to the Shadow Realm. And now we don't have a backup center. But like, you just got to have as many options as possible. And they got to be pieces that you can roll through in the season for it to be like, hey, we tried this and it worked for a while, but now it doesn't. All right, we're waiving him. We're bringing in this guy. You really got to have like a deep scouting unit, I think, to keep in a personnel scout to keep bringing in guys that can fill in those gaps in order for the depth, just to inning eat to get you through the regular season. Because once you get to the postseason, it's even though depth has been such a big part of these playoffs, center depth honestly isn't. It's not like we're seeing like dominant 4 big man lineups. It's just like, all right, we got 3 guys we can put in different components. That's really all you got to be able to get to.
There's certainly 2 other names that are of quite a bit of interest to Bucks fans that we haven't got into. So we'll take a look at those names on the free agent list for the Bucks coming up next. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space: conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Now, I recently picked up a new outdoor dining set and got some new modern lounge chairs as well. It completely transforms the outdoor space. If your style leans more clean and modern, you'll be able to filter down to that exact look and find exactly what fits your budget. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That is wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So the other two names are, again, very polarizing names among Bucks fans, Kevin Porter Jr. and Gary Trent Jr. On this show, me and Frank later in the season, we're talking about Kevin Porter Jr. And even when he was starting to look much better and having some impactful play for the Bucks, I mean, it's still a guy that he was available for a reason, and he signed with the Clippers for the minimum last summer for a reason that I never got the assumption his market value is going to be anything really above like the biannual, that teams are going to be that invested in going after him there, that I've long assumed he will be back because I don't know that there's going to be all that stout of a market for him.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm always kind of the opinion that the NBA needs to take this more seriously. They need to take domestic violence seriously. And I think it is always a disservice by us to not mention these things, because if we don't mention it, then we are complicit in the NBA's attempts to just like sweep this under the rug and be like, nope, don't know what you're talking about. And that's as much on the NBPA as I think it is on the NBA. I think both of those sides need to get in alignment of like, hey, we got to set some standards, and we got to set a high bar here for the behavior that we anticipate. That said, on KPJ, I do think that I wonder what his market's going to be, because there are teams that will ignore all those kind of issues, and there are teams I think that recognize. Like I talked to two scouts this week that said I thought he was, by the end of that playoff run, one of like their three best players. Like that's how good he was in terms of what he was bringing to the table, and that's pretty valuable. And from all indications, I think that they probably agree with that. And again, if you're in their position where you are so limited in what you are capable of doing to add, these are the type of decisions that you almost have to make, especially if he hasn't been a locker room problem for you and he hasn't been a distraction.
Yeah, and like that was the bigger part for me too. I mean, all it takes is one team to show interest and raise that value. But I mean, we do know the Bucks have been in on him for some time, and they thought they were going to sign him last summer before he ultimately went to the Clippers. So there is a little bit of that relationship. To your point too, when some of those questions came up about his background, Doc Rivers is a guy that has had a relationship with Ty Lue and with KPJ for a couple of years now. And I think that was one of the more frustrating things that you would hear Doc Rivers when asked about, what did you guys do? Like, what was the due diligence that you did here? And how confident are you that this is behind him? He has grown from it. He has learned and everything else. And we just got it. I talked to Ty Lue and he vouched for him. So I think that was the frustrating part too, of you didn't really get an answer there. It's going to hang over him with some teams, but to your point, not every team. And it just, again, takes one to say, okay, we liked what we saw leading up to the playoffs. And in the back half of that series too, is when he started to play better. He had a really rough first two games in that series. But yeah, it just takes one team to say, look, the tools are there. He's got good size and there's certainly talent, that let's just go buy low on him. The other junior, Gary Trent Jr., and that market's going to be much different, you would assume, for Gary Trent Jr., but another guy that, you know, it's been kind of the model for the Bucks. We just find two guards off the scrap heap. You get to play next to Giannis, get to knock down some shots. You boost your value. In the sense of Gary Trent Jr., it took longer than anticipated. And part of that was, you know, the deeper you got into the season too, wondering, I get you like him coming off the bench and the role that he has, but when you look at this roster, he really should be starting. And that's where the team started to perform better.
Yeah. And I think he does bring a lot. I actually really loved his season last year. I thought that he brought a lot of what they needed, just like the competency. It's surprising to me that the market on him is so low. I understand how bad his first stretch out of Toronto was, and he dealt with a lot of, there were expectations, I think, that his people had of what he was going to be in the league. And that's a difficult transition to accepting that you're a role player. That said, like, you know, I would not be surprised if he's a guy that somebody takes a reach on in free agency based off of, you know, we talk about it just takes one team. If you're looking for a value play in a free agency market amongst these teams that have money, there's so few of them, but there's also so few available free agents. I just kind of wonder if he's a guy that some teams might look at as an opportunity to buy low on somebody with, obviously that end was so bad, but it's also just like, man, it's just like, all right, he had a bad sequence at the end. He was also really good for them down the stretch of that season. I actually am. I am a firm believer in you should buy low on Gary Trent Jr. at this point.
Well, I mean, it was really a bad play too, where he couldn't handle a ball. Where, I mean, all you got to do is hold on to the ball if you're AJ Green, wait to get fouled, and it's a different story. Do you think he gets 8 figures annually?
It's a good question. I'm tempted to say no, because I feel like so much of what we're going to see over the next span is going to be largely teams not willing to take as big of a risk financially on some of these guys.
Like role player types.
Yeah. That's what I think we're going to see. I think the CBA is it's dictating such a dramatic turn of having to restructure how your books are. What's the team that's kind of looking at him? That said, I think I don't want to rule it out. I would be a little bit surprised if it was that high, but it's entirely possible, because how many times do we have these numbers where like he got what? So I won't rule it out either.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the figure where the Bucks are in a tough spot, as we've already kind of tiptoed around, where they have much more flexibility now than they did the previous 2 off seasons, but it's still, you have more flexibility, but you don't have very many options that you can pivot to. So you kind of have to bite the bullet and just say, okay, if this is what it takes, this is what we're paying him. I think once it starts to approach 10 million is where it gets tough. But again, what's plan B? Because you can say, well, AJ Green, and you can extend him, sure, but who's playing behind AJ Green then?
Right. I think that limitation, I think, is, you got to build out. So they have like a million things here. They have to make up for Dame being out. They have to try and compete and contend. They have to try and limit the financial impact of this based off of where they've been last couple of years and the lower expectations without Dame. Oh, and they got to do it with no assets in order to facilitate those things. It's tough, man. It's really brutal. This is why I wrote a whole thing advocating for them to get rid of the Stepien rule until the end of the CBA, because for me, these teams like the Bucks, I'm just like, what do you expect them to do here? You put them in the situation where they were operating under one set of rules, and now they're under a completely different one that tells them they can't do the decisions that they've already made. And that limits the opportunities for them and puts them in the situation where it's possible they get back everybody on discounts. Everybody buys back in and they're able to make this work, and they come back with a pretty solid roster. But there's also like a very strong likelihood that it's going to be like, what are you going to do about your backup X position? And the answer is figure it out, I guess. And that's all you could really do.
Well, I mean, and look, it's possible they retain everyone. It's possible they retain everyone but Brook Lopez. But even still, to your point, you don't have Damian Lillard, and this is a team that won 49 and 48 games the last 2 years. So even if you're bringing back the same group, even with Jason Tatum down, like, where does that really put you in the Eastern Conference? Of you're still in that same conversation of your 5, 6, or 7 probably in the East, best case scenario. So that's the tough thing. You brought up the CBA. I do have one question about that I want to get into with you, and just the rest of that conversation, the Eastern Conference, and some similarities, you mentioned it, between the Bucks and the Denver Nuggets. We'll get into that next. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. And this year's matchups are certainly delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. You can see that exact view before you buy your seat. No surprises. Once you get into the arena, their app makes it ridiculously simple. It just takes 2 taps. You're in there and done. And with a Game Time guarantee, you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they will credit you 110% of the difference. Also, the NFL schedule just dropped. And you better believe you can already find your fall plans out there on Game Time. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. And with a Game Time guarantee, your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll always get the best price with fees included. So what you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code Locked On NBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, in terms of the CBA, why did the players sign off on this? Like, I keep coming back to, I mean, you guys know this is killing the middle class. So was it simply the drug testing thing? Why else would the Players Association agree to this?
I think one of the struggles that they have is the strong voiced members of their caucus criticize leadership without generating support from the rank and file. After the 2011 lockout and the changes to the CBA, I was in a locker room and a player was asking about a change that was made, and another player was having to explain it to him, the rep to the union, and he was like, I had no idea. And I was just like, but this, like, you voted on, like, this is what, how do you not know? No, like, there were several guys. And that's important to kind of stress here. That's not the average. I think that, especially now, I think most players are way more informed about this stuff. But I do think it's like, it's variable like it is across any group where there's people that know a lot about the subject matter that impacts them. And there's people that don't know anything about it. And there's people all throughout the middle of it. I think the biggest thing was everyone wanted to keep the good times rolling. Like, these players now, especially the stars who have so much power in locker rooms and over other guys' futures, like, those guys are making $250 million per deal. That's insane and true. And so there's a lot of like, keep the gravy train running versus trying to figure out when it is that you're going to actually risk a lockout and the lost wages from that, because a lot of these players are simply not in a position to do that. Like, this is earning, you've only got so long in the league. You miss 6 months or a season of a league, that's killer for you. And some of these guys, it really is like, it is very much like, hey, I do not have enough to get through here. And so, like, those things are huge, I think, in those kind of conversations. I in particular do feel, after the 2011 lockout, which was primarily directed by bad non-player management, but also by role players, star players took a lot more ownership because they're so influential. And so they took a much bigger role in these conversations. Draymond Green, Chris Paul, all these type of guys, right? Like, CJ is a role player, but CJ was like most improved player, like was like a number 2 on a playoff team. If you look at this, the CBA still very much benefits these star players. It doesn't benefit them completely because an artificial max is still against their best interests. But it does everything else in terms of bonuses and how much they can make, and like, their influence and power is very much protected and taken care of. And so, like, the middle class, like, yeah, the middle class could get together and make noise, but then what you risk is you risk off alienating that star player that you are dependent on. And there's like a lot of like sports locker room, like, look, man, I am just a role player. He's the guy with the hard job. Like, that's how I think a lot of players honestly feel, even though I'm always like, but you do all the stuff that helps them win. Like, there's lots of guys that score 25 a night. So I think that dynamic played a role in it as well. Those are my best guesses without having like been inside the room.
Coming into the offseason, what was your assumption that would happen? And we've seen more and more speculation and quote unquote reporting on it, but there's no definitive answer yet. But where were you thinking things would go with Giannis?
I thought he was gone. How is he possibly going to stay? They have no assets to improve the team. They have no cap space flexibility. They're up against all these limitations. Dame is out for the season. No one's going to blame him. You never get this kind of opportunity where you can leave and still it be okay. Yeah. Like LeBron did this in Cleveland, and Cleveland fans were like, yeah, we get it. Like he gave us a championship and 3 runs. Like it's fine. Like we get it. We're happy for him. Right. You have to be that level. You never get this kind of opportunity. If he left, Bucks fans were going to turn on Giannis. They still would have wanted good things for him, and they would have understood. They would hope that you would get like a good return on it. You don't want to get back diddly squat. But I think his goodwill would not have been squandered. And so when he scheduled that meeting, it's like, oh, we know how this goes. Like schedules the meeting, and then immediately afterwards, the trade request, and then nope, just silence. Yeah. And I think that's been the interesting thing about it. Is that no news is good news. And I have liked the way that both Giannis's camp has handled it, the Bucks have handled it, and local reporting has handled it, where it's like immediately you saw the shift from people being like, so here's what a gap year looks like. Like this is what it would look like for Giannis if he stayed.
Yeah.
The same week that like no report came out about it. And I do kind of wonder if some of this is Giannis not wanting to be like, yep, you got my full support, whatever you want to do. It may be as simple as, hey, I'm staying unless we get to the end of the summer and you don't have a center or a backup point guard or a backup shooting guard or a team that can contend, then we might have to talk about some things. Like maybe that's the case, but as it stands right now, like I think it's amazing. I think it's awesome. I think it's terrific. I thought he had to be gone because it made the most logical sense from not just a basketball standpoint for him, but also like he's not the same kid he was when he got here. And I've seen that so much. It's like, it's okay for him to have grown into, I spent a lot of time in LA and I want to be there, or I want to, grow my business interest, my brand, whatever stuff that they deal with. So that was kind of my thoughts on it, but I'm thrilled that it looks like he's going to stay. I think that's for the best for everybody.
Yeah. I think, everybody feels the same way, certainly around these parts, but the one thing I would caution every Bucks fan with is the point you just mentioned too. It doesn't mean this conversation's going away if you get off to a 3-15 start in the season and you have some clear holes on the roster. And I mean, it's certainly not going away next summer either when he moves even closer to the end of the contract. And maybe it's just the annual thing where he doesn't ask for a trade, but the contract comes up and you had a gap year and you see the pieces aren't there. It is time to move on when I become a free agent. So we may dodge the bullet this summer, but the conversation's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah. And it might continue into next season. And you don't really want that. The hope I think is, look, I'll also say this. Horst in this front office has so often been up against it. And it's been that meme of like, how are you going to wriggle your way out of this one? Nonetheless, like they've gotten themselves out of this mess so many times where it's like, oh man, Giannis has got to be gone. And then Horst is like, nope, I traded for Drew Holiday. Nope, I traded for Damian Lillard.
Yeah.
Nope, I fired Mike Budenholzer and gave you the coach that you wanted. Oh, okay, that didn't work. I hired Doc Rivers. So like, you always want the team to do whatever is necessary for that elite all-time franchise player, and the Bucks have done it over and over again. They deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and look, if as the trade clearly did not work on the floor to ship off Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma. The other trades that happened, you could have done without making that trade. You could have traded DeLon Wright for Jericho Sims. You could have made the Marjan for Kevin Porter Jr. trade. On the floor, didn't yield the results you were looking for. The second apron piece, though, is huge for this team because if they don't make that trade and everything else happens and Damian Lillard still tears his Achilles, I don't really see a scenario where Giannis isn't coming to that realization of it's not going to happen here. If Dame's out for the year and all you have are veteran minimums to round out your roster. So in that sense, it could be much worse and could have gotten much darker here for the Bucks. You agree with that?
I think here's my question, I think, going forward, because I do think that we're going to see more and more teams take this approach. What is an easier asset to turn into multiple players? Chris Middleton or Kyle Kuzma? At the time of the trade. I don't want to judge it now. I think that's unfair to be like, hey, Kyle just had a nightmarish postseason stretch. Values at an all-time low. But at the time, like, which piece gets you? Because that, I think, is what these teams are still trying to avoid, which is what's frustrating me. Is I keep like screaming at the top of my lungs and just being like, guys, do you not see? You can't just swap out. It's not Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma or Michael Porter Jr. for Zach LaVine, or you have to break these things into smaller pieces that are more manageable under the CBA for less money overall, and then try and aggregate them back together to get that component that you're looking for. Like, you have to take a step backwards in order to go forward in this new CBA. That's how your owners built it. And that reluctance is always really interesting because it's just like, well, we can't give up on him. He's a really good player. It's like, yes, but he doesn't do X, Y, and Z that you need. It's great that he does A and B. And I'm not saying you don't need to address A and B, but you got to take a step back in A and B so that you have something to do X, Y, and Z with. And that reluctance, I think, is what is holding a lot of these teams back.
Last thing, since you brought it up a couple of minutes ago, what similarities do you see between this Nuggets team and this Bucks team? Because on the surface, it seems like there's a lot, down to Bucks win a championship with a pretty similar roster build, the comps between Giannis and Jokic, and then all of a sudden, no, you can't get out of the first or second round. In the case of the Nuggets, the Bucks are still hung up on the first, but it's starting to feel like, as an outsider, it's drifting closer and closer to, you guys are headed down the same road the Bucks have gone down.
It's funny because a lot of their path after winning the title was to avoid being Milwaukee. And what I mean by that is Milwaukee made, I think, what was a very reasonable choice at the time to be like, hey, yeah, it's tough under the CBA for us to build, to add talent, but we're going to keep cycling in guys that we know can play in the playoffs. We're going to have Wes Matthews and Jay Crowder and all these guys, we're going to cycle through veterans instead of developing young talent. And then the fans are like, why didn't you develop any young talent? And the Nuggets go the exact opposite way. And they're like, we're going to develop young talent and not get any veterans. And we're going to have Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson and Zeke Naji and Peyton Watson. And then none of those guys, none of them work out on a significant level because you drafted at the end of the first round going into the second. And you're right back here where you have a 7-man rotation at max because none of them made the kind of jump that you wanted. Now, that caused a lot of tension internally because it was the front office being like, well, they could be good if you played them. And then the coaching staff being like, if I play them, we'll lose. And then you'll fire me. And Bud gets fired 2 years after winning the title. Malone gets fired 2 years after winning the title. The similarities really are pretty stark. And you got two franchise players that I think are really committed to the communities and are different from a lot of the other superstars around, which is, I think interesting, but also really demanding. It's demanding because of how great they are. Their causes, I think I picked up on this covering the Nuggets this year. The weight of letting down Jokic all year dragged on that team's chemistry, of just the constant feeling of like, we're letting him down. We're not good enough. Like, we lost this game, even though he had 37, 25, 20. Yeah. How could we lose this game? We got to do more for the big fella. Got to help out Joker. All these type of things. I think that honestly wears on a team rather than everybody feeling like they contribute what they can to a team. And so there's a lot of comparisons between them, and they're both facing a similar situation with no picks until the very end of the life cycle, hoping to get those things replenished in time to be able to, have a little bit of a backstop. It's tough, but it's two teams I really do feel like, their owners, regardless of how they voted, and I'm sure they both voted, they voted for the new CBA because the votes were pretty clear. But like, it's two ownership groups that put their front offices, their people, in a real bind with what they agreed to.
Yeah, there's certainly two interesting teams to keep an eye on go forward here, as it's going to be. I mean, do you buy into this is going to be the craziest offseason we've ever seen?
It's been talked about so much that now I'm kind of like, I mean, we'll see. I think one of the problems is like, you have to have teams that are willing to help you make these deals. And that means taking on more money for teams that are really bad. How many teams can you really find to do that? But that said, I think there's a lot of teams that are looking for significant shakeups, and we are going to see a lot of movement because the parity era has opened the door. It's funny because it's just like, hey, the door is open. Unfortunately, the hallway to get to the door is a centimeter and a half. So squeeze through there now to get to the door.
It's the Nathan for you episode where you get the free TV, but you got to go through this room that has an alligator and something else to get the TV. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with both these teams, the Bucks and the Denver Nuggets, and the league as a whole. You can find them on the Action Network and, of course, on the Locked On Nuggets show as well. Matt, thanks for your time today. Great to catch up with you.
Anytime, man. Take care.
That'll do it for today's show. We'll be back with Camille on Friday to take a look at the rest of the Giannis front here. For Matt, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.